My friends, for centuries the world has repeated the words of the Master, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." And yet very few have paused long enough to ask where this kingdom is to be found, or why so many sincere seekers feel as though they are walking in circles, praying without answer, striving without peace. And so I want to speak to you not as one offering a new doctrine, but as one reminding you of what Jesus himself revealed so simply, so plainly, that the human mind overlooked it. The kingdom of God is within you, not above you, not ahead of you, not hidden in some distant geography, nor reserved for a future moment after death. Within you, within your consciousness, within the very life you are living at this instant. You see, the tragedy of much spiritual seeking is that it begins with the assumption that God is absent. And when you believe God is absent, your entire search becomes an attempt to bring God from somewhere else into your experience. And when you believe the kingdom is far off, your spiritual journey becomes a lifelong effort to reach what seems forever beyond your grasp. But the Master did not say, "Seek to bring the kingdom," nor did he ask you to journey toward it as though it were an object hidden behind the stars. He revealed a presence already here, already complete, already functioning as the very life of your being. If you have ever cried out, "Where is God? Why does God feel distant?" you have already accepted the premise that creates all spiritual frustration. And so today, let us lay that false premise aside. Let us begin from the truth. Let us begin from the recognition that God is not a traveler who must arrive, not a power that must be summoned, not a reward that must be earned. God is the living presence at the center of your consciousness, the invisible life that is your life, the infinite love that animates every breath and movement of your existence. You have not been failing in your spiritual search. You have simply been taught to look outward when Jesus pointed inward. You have been told to strive for what must be realized, not achieved. And so, as we embark upon this journey together, let us do so with a humble willingness to release the old idea of God as a far-off being who occasionally intervenes, and open ourselves to the recognition of God as the very essence of our own being. In this hour, I invite you not to strive, not to struggle, but to awaken, to discover that the kingdom you have sought so long with such earnestness has never been hidden from you. It has been present, fully present, within the depths of your own consciousness, awaiting only your recognition. And as this recognition dawns, you will find yourself at peace, not because you have reached God, but because you have discovered that God has never departed from you. Now let us look more deeply into the very reason spiritual seekers become weary, discouraged, and disheartened in their search for God. It is not because God is difficult to find. It is not because heaven is hidden behind a veil that only the worthy may lift. It is because almost the entire world, including the religious world, has trained us to seek God where God is not. And when you seek where God is not, you can only return empty-handed, no matter how sincere your prayer or how devout your heart. Consider for a moment how many times you have turned to the outer world expecting it to reveal God to you, expecting a person, a sign, a manifestation, a change in circumstance, a divine intervention to prove that God is present. And yet every time you do this, you unknowingly affirm a belief the Master never taught, that God is separate from you, separate from your consciousness, separate from your very life. And the moment you accept separation, even unconsciously, you cannot help but feel the weight of spiritual loneliness, the ache of believing God is somewhere you are not. When the mind believes in distance, it naturally seeks solutions in distance. It prays from a sense of lack. It reaches outward in desperation. It tries to bring God down into the moment or to coax peace into a troubled situation. But my friends, This is the very reason prayer feels unanswered. Not because God is withholding anything, but because we are praying from a premise that has no spiritual foundation, the premise of absence. Do you see the problem? If you pray as though God is far, you reinforce the illusion of distance. If you believe the kingdom is ahead of you, you bind yourself to endless searching. If you imagine that God's guidance, God's provision, or God's healing must travel toward you from outside, you silently deny the truth that God is the life of your being here now, fully present and wholly complete. This is why the world's seekers grow tired. It is not the search that exhausts them, it is the direction of the search. Outward effort consumes energy, inward realization restores it. Outward effort breeds fear, inward realization releases it. Outward effort implies that something essential is missing. Inward realization reveals that nothing has ever been absent. The frustration so many experience in their spiritual lives arises from an innocent but fundamental misunderstanding. The belief that God's presence must be obtained rather than recognized, sought rather than realized, requested rather than revealed from within. And as long as the mind believes that God and man stand apart, your prayers, your meditations, your spiritual practices will feel like attempts to bridge an impossible distance. Let us be very clear. You are not frustrated because God is silent. You are frustrated because you have been listening in the wrong direction. When you look outward for what is already within, you can only encounter emptiness. But when you turn within, even slightly, even with the smallest mustard seed willingness, you begin to feel a subtle shift, a softening, a quiet assurance. You sense that you are not striving toward God, you are resting in God. You sense that the spiritual journey is not the path of reaching outward, but the path of awakening inward. And it is this awakening that leads us to the next stage of our spiritual unfolding. Let us look now at the teaching of the Master, not through the lens of tradition, nor through the weight of inherited interpretation, but through the quiet inner illumination that reveals spiritual truth as it is. For Jesus spoke words that were not meant merely to inform the mind, but to awaken the soul to its own divine reality. And among these words, none are more central, more misunderstood, and more transformative than the statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." You must understand that Jesus was not pointing to a place. He was not describing a realm to be reached after death, nor a kingdom that would someday descend visibly upon the earth. He was speaking from the consciousness of one who lived in perpetual union with the infinite. When he used the word kingdom, he was describing the awareness of God's presence, an awareness that transcends time, transcends form, and reveals itself as the substance of all being. And when he declared that this kingdom is within you, he tore down every doctrine of distance that humanity had built around God. But the human mind, bound to the senses, could not grasp such a revelation. And so through the centuries, the teachings of Jesus were interpreted through the framework of duality, God above and man below, heaven in the future and struggle in the present. Yet Jesus himself never taught duality. He taught oneness. He taught immediacy. He taught the infinite nearness of God. I and my Father are one. The Father is within me. My kingdom is not of this world. Let us look now at the teaching of the Master, not through the lens of tradition, nor through the weight of inherited interpretation, but through the quiet inner illumination that reveals spiritual truth as it is. For Jesus spoke words that were not meant merely to inform the mind, but to awaken the soul to its own divine reality. And among these words, none are more central, more misunderstood, and more transformative than the statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." Let us look now at the teaching of the Master, not through the lens of tradition, nor through the weight of inherited interpretation, but through the quiet inner illumination that reveals spiritual truth as it is. For Jesus spoke words that were not meant merely to inform the mind, but to awaken the soul to its own divine reality. And among these words, none are more central, more misunderstood, and more transformative than the statement, "The kingdom of God is within you." The moment you imagine the kingdom as something to be entered through effort, you have already stepped outside it. But the moment you realize that God is the very essence of your being, the very breath that moves through you, the very intelligence that animates your life, you have already entered the kingdom without moving an inch. For this kingdom is not reached by time or distance, it is revealed through recognition. Do you see the problem? If you pray as though God is far, you reinforce the illusion of distance. If you believe the kingdom is ahead of you, you bind yourself to endless searching. If you imagine that God's guidance, God's provision, or God's healing must travel toward you from outside, you silently deny the truth that God is the life of your being here now, fully present and wholly complete. It is the unchanging, invisible reality behind all visible form. And when he declared that this kingdom is within you, he tore down every doctrine of distance that humanity had built around God. In this recognition, spiritual seeking begins to change shape. You are no longer reaching outward for God's presence. You are no longer waiting for a future manifestation. You are no longer living in anticipation of a divine intervention that may or may not come. Instead, you are awakening to the truth that the presence you seek is the very consciousness with which you are listening to these words. It is the unchanging, invisible reality behind all visible form. And it is here, in this dawning realization, that the shift from asking God to realizing God begins. When we read Jesus through Goldsmit's consciousness, we discover that the teachings were never meant to direct us toward a future salvation, but toward a present realization. They were never meant to create believers, but revealers, not followers of doctrine, but awakeners to the inner Christ, the inner kingdom, the inner presence that has always been the life of our being. The world prays in one way, and the Christ consciousness prays in another. The world prays by petition, "God, please do this for me. Please intervene. Please fix. Please repair." But the Master and all who have awakened as he awakened pray by realization. They do not try to bring God into a situation. They do not attempt to persuade God to act. They rest in the quiet, knowing that God, being infinite, omnipresent, and indivisible, is already the only presence in that situation, whether or not appearances agree. This is the radical shift that Joel Goldsmith emphasized. Prayer is not a method of getting God to do something. Prayer is the realization that God already is all. And this realization becomes possible only when we stop treating God as though he were outside our own being. You see, the moment you ask God to enter a circumstance, you have implicitly assumed his absence. And the moment you assume his absence, you cannot possibly experience his presence, for the very premise of your prayer is separation. The bootless cry, as Goldsmith called it, is the prayer of a mind that imagines God is somewhere else. But when you understand the truth, when you realize that God is not coming from afar, that God is not outside the problem, not outside the body, not outside the relationship, you stop trying to reach outward and you begin to rest inwardly. You begin to sense that there is a presence at the core of your being, a presence that does not need your persuasion, your pleading, or your pressure. You begin to discover that God is not the answer to your prayer. God is the silence that reveals there was never a question. Let us be very practical here. When you ask God to heal a condition, you are assuming a power apart from God, a power that caused the illness. When you ask God to fix a relationship, you are assuming that another person holds power over your peace. When you ask God to open a door, you are assuming that human circumstance can block divine activity. All of this is spiritual impossibility. There is no power apart from God. There is no presence apart from God. There is no activity, no substance, no law that can stand outside the one. And so Goldsmit would say, stop giving power to the problem. Realize that God is the only power present, and the problem dissolves of itself. This is the essence of the shift. We stop asking God to change the outer picture. We realize God is the invisible reality behind all pictures. And when we do this, something wondrous happens. We find that fear loosens its grip. We find that the mind becomes still. We find that circumstances begin to shift without our manipulation, not because we ask God to change them, but because we recognize the presence that was always governing them. As long as you believe your good comes from outside, from people, from the world, from favorable conditions, you will continue to pray outwardly, anxiously, pleadingly. But the moment you realize that God is the life of your life, the peace of your peace, the intelligence of your mind, the substance of your supply, and the harmony of your relationships, you will find that you no longer pray to get. You pray to realize, to become aware of what is eternally true. This is the prayer of the mystic. This is the prayer of the master. This is the prayer of all who have entered the kingdom consciousness. Not a prayer of asking, but a prayer of recognition. Not a prayer of seeking, but a prayer of seeing. Not a prayer of striving, but a prayer of resting in the truth that God is already here. And it is this recognition that prepares us to discern the great distinction between material sense and spiritual consciousness, which is the foundation for entering the kingdom within. Before we can enter the kingdom within, we must understand why the outer world appears so real, so commanding, so overwhelming. We must understand why fear grips us, why circumstances disturb us, why lack seems possible, and why God can appear distant even when we believe in Him with all our hearts. And the reason is simple, though the mind resists it at first. We have been trained from birth to trust the five senses. We have been taught that what we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell is reality. And so we live as though appearances are the final truth, unaware that we are interpreting the world through the limited instrument of material sense. Before we can enter the kingdom within, we must understand why the outer world appears so real, so commanding, so overwhelming. We must understand why fear grips us, why circumstances disturb us, why lack seems possible, and why God can appear distant even when we believe in Him with all our hearts. And the reason is simple, though the mind resists it at first. We have been trained from birth to trust the five senses. But spiritual consciousness reveals something entirely different. Spiritual consciousness is the awareness that God alone is the reality of all being. God alone is the life of every person. God alone is the substance of every form. God alone is the law governing the universe. And because God is indivisible, infinite, and omnipresent, there is no true power apart from God, no second presence, no second cause, no opposing force that can threaten the harmony already established in spirit. This is the meaning of oneness. Not that everything is spiritually connected, but that everything is spiritually one. Let us be practical. When you see disease in the body, that is the testimony of material sense. When you see conflict in a relationship, that is the testimony of material sense. When you see lack in your affairs, that is the testimony of material sense. When you see danger in the world, that too is the testimony of material sense. And if you accept these testimonies as the truth, you will experience fear, doubt, and separation, because you are living as though appearances possess reality, authority, and power. But when you rise into spiritual consciousness, something remarkable occurs. You begin to recognize that all appearance, whether harmonious or discordant, is but the play of the senses. Behind the appearance stands the spiritual reality, unchanged and unchanging. God, the only presence. God, the only power. God, the only law. God, the only life. God, the only substance. And as this recognition deepens, the outer picture begins to shift, not because you changed it through mental effort, but because you no longer give it the power it never possessed. Goldsmit would often say, you do not heal a condition. You reveal the presence of God, and the condition yields. And this is the essence of spiritual consciousness, the awareness of what is eternally true, regardless of what the senses report. The world may say, there is danger. Spiritual consciousness whispers, God is here. The world may say, there is lack. Spiritual consciousness knows. Infinite supply is the nature of God. The world may say, there is conflict. Spiritual consciousness rests in God is the harmony of all being. And the moment you accept the spiritual as real, the material loses its authority over your peace. But let us be very honest. You cannot force yourself into spiritual consciousness. You cannot affirm your way into it. You cannot shout into it or demand it. Spiritual consciousness dawns as material sense loosens its grip. And material sense loosens its grip only when we stop feeding it with fear, judgment, and the belief that it has power. The Master said, judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is not moral judgment. It is spiritual recognition, the ability to look straight at the appearance and know that it is not the truth. It is knowing that behind every discord, the presence of God remains untouched. It is knowing that behind every seeming lack, the fullness of Spirit is already present. It is knowing that behind every storm, the calm reality of God stands unimpaired. And it is precisely this understanding that prepares the way for the practice of entering the kingdom within, not by attempting to change appearances, but by recognizing the spiritual presence that lies behind them, within them, and as their true essence. Now that we understand the distinction between material sense and spiritual consciousness, we can begin to approach the most sacred aspect of this path, the actual practice of entering the kingdom within. And let us be clear from the beginning, this is not a practice of doing, this is not a technique for manipulating thought, nor is it a method for improving the outer world. It is a practice of recognition, of quiet receptivity, of turning from the outer appearances to the inner reality that has always been present but seldom acknowledged. In the human search for God, people have used many forms of prayer. They have pleaded, begged, affirmed, recited, commanded, declared. They have tried to convince themselves and God of what they desire. But all of these belong to the realm of the human mind. They begin with the assumption that there is a lack, and that through thought or emotion, that lack may be corrected. Spiritual listening, as Goldsmit taught it, begins from a wholly different premise, that nothing is lacking because God is already the fullness and the completeness of every moment. This is why true prayer begins in silence, not the silence of discipline or restraint, but the silence of relinquishment. The silence that arises when we release the belief that we must direct God, inform God, or persuade God. It is the silence that comes when we understand that God is not in need of our words, our instruction, or our guidance. God is the very presence we are seeking. And so spiritual listening is not an attempt to reach God. It is the willingness to allow the presence to reveal itself. When we enter this sacred silence, we do not ask, we do not seek signs, we do not attempt to feel spiritual or produce inspiration. We simply become still, inwardly still, and allow the truth to disclose itself. For spiritual truth is not created by the mind. It is revealed to the mind that is quiet enough to receive it. And what is revealed? Not always words, not always messages. More often, it is a subtle sense of peace that is not of this world, a soft assurance that does not come from reason, a gentle awareness that something real, something profound, something eternal is present right where you are. And when that presence is felt, even faintly, you have begun to enter the kingdom. For the kingdom is not a realm of thought, it is the atmosphere of God realized within your consciousness. Goldsmit would say, do not try to make anything happen in prayer. Why? Because the moment you try to make something happen, you have shifted into the human mind, and the human mind cannot enter the kingdom. The mind that tries to achieve God cannot see God, for it is trying to grasp what can only be revealed. Instead, we approach quietly. Here I am, Father, not asking, not trying, not striving, simply open. In this openness, you may become aware of a gentle inner movement as though truth is unfolding of its own accord. You may feel a sense of safety as though nothing outside you holds power. You may feel the burdens of the day loosening as though their weight was never truly yours, or you may simply feel nothing at all, yet know inwardly that something deep and invisible is taking place. This is the beginning of spiritual listening, a turning from the outer world of effect to the inner world of cause, a willingness to let God be God. And the more often you return to this stillness, not as a duty, but as a refuge, the more natural it becomes. You begin to sense the presence not only in meditation, but in the ordinary moments of life, standing in a doorway, pausing in the midst of a conversation, resting between breaths, and awareness begins to permeate your experience. The kingdom is here. Do not measure your progress. Do not attempt to capture the feeling. Simply return again and again to the stillness in which God reveals himself not as a distant being, but as the life of your own being. This is the practice by which the walls of material sense begin to thin and the light of spiritual consciousness begins to shine through. It is the doorway into the kingdom within. And now that we understand how to enter this inner sanctuary, we can begin to explore how to recognize the signs of its dawning, how to tell in the quiet moments of life that you have already stepped into the atmosphere of God's presence. As we proceed, let us understand something very important. The kingdom of God does not suddenly descend upon you like a light from the sky. It does not announce itself with trumpets, nor does it arrive with a dramatic inner explosion. The kingdom reveals itself in the quietest of ways, in subtle shifts of perception, in gentle movements of awareness, in moments so simple you might overlook them if you are searching for something grand. You see, the kingdom is not a future attainment. It is a present reality. And the moment your consciousness begins to relax into the truth of God's nearness, the signs of the kingdom begin to show themselves. They do not appear in the outer world first. They appear within you. And when they appear, they carry a distinct quality, a softness, a stillness, a peace that the world cannot imitate. One of the first signs is this: problems lose their sense of finality. You look at the same condition, the same circumstance, the same relationship, and yet something within you whispers, this is not all there is. You begin to sense that what you are seeing is but the surface of things, and behind that surface is a presence untouched by the appearance. This quiet sense of something more is the first hint that spiritual consciousness is dawning. Another sign is the easing of inner tension. Not necessarily the disappearance of all outer challenges, but the loosening of the emotional grip they once held on you. You begin to observe instead of react. You begin to watch instead of fear. Even in the midst of difficulty, there arises a center of stillness, a feeling that you are upheld by something greater than the circumstance. This stillness is not self-made. It is the fragrance of the kingdom. A third sign is that you stop trying to fix life through human effort. This is not passivity. It is trust. You no longer rush to manipulate outer events or control outcomes. Instead, you turn within first. You pause. You listen. You remember the presence. And in that remembrance, you find guidance that does not come from thinking, but from knowing. When decisions arise from this inner knowing, they carry peace instead of fear. That peace is the evidence of the kingdom. You may also notice that forgiveness begins to happen without effort. Not because you have willed yourself to forgive, but because the sense of separation itself begins to dissolve. You start seeing others not as separate personalities capable of harming you, but as expressions of the same divine life struggling through human limitation. The enemy becomes a brother. The insult loses power. The past releases its hold. Forgiveness becomes a natural consequence of seeing truly. Another sign is the awakening of gratitude, not gratitude for things, but gratitude for being. A quiet joy arises simply from the recognition that God is here, that life is unfolding, that you are not alone in the universe. This gratitude is not directed outward. It wells up from within, uncaused by anything external. It is the heart's response to the felt presence of God. And perhaps the clearest sign of all is this. You begin to sense that nothing is outside God. You may find yourself pausing throughout the day and silently recognizing God is here. In the grocery store, in a conversation, in a moment of conflict, in the stillness before sleep, something deep within acknowledges the presence, not as a belief, not as a philosophy, but as an inner fact. This recognition is the kingdom. You do not have to be perfect to experience these signs. You do not have to sustain them every moment. Even a fleeting glimpse is enough to show you that you have touched the edge of something real, something that does not come and go, though your awareness of it may. And every glimpse leaves a trace. Every moment of recognition strengthens the spiritual capacity to see beyond appearance. When these signs appear even subtly, you may know with certainty the kingdom has already begun to reveal itself in your consciousness. You are not approaching it, you are awakening within it. And now that you know how to recognize these early dawnings of spiritual awareness, we may move naturally into the next stage of this journey, entering more deeply into the inner kingdom through a quiet, receptive meditation, a practice not of doing, but of being. Let us now turn inward together, not to perform a technique, not to repeat words, not to achieve an experience, but simply to rest in the awareness of the presence that has been with us from the beginning. In this moment, there is nothing you must accomplish. There is nothing you must correct or improve. There is only the gentle willingness to set aside the world of appearances and allow the truth to reveal itself within your own being. We begin not by reaching outward, but by releasing every mental habit that seeks to grasp or manipulate the spiritual. There is nothing to grasp. Spirit is not an object. God is not distant. The kingdom is not a goal. We are not climbing toward God. We are relaxing into God. And so we enter this quietness with a simple inward recognition. God is here, not coming, not arriving, already here. Let the mind rest. Let the thoughts pass without engagement. Let the concerns of the outer world dissolve into the background. You are not trying to silence the mind. You are gently withdrawing attention from it, returning to the simple awareness of presence. Feel the freedom of not having to pray to God, but resting in the truth that God is already the life within you. Let this inner whisper arise of its own accord. The kingdom is within me, not as a belief, but as a fact of spiritual being. Do not try to feel anything. Feelings come and go. Truth remains. If a sense of peace comes, receive it. If no feeling comes, be at peace anyway. Truth does not depend on the senses. Now, allow this deeper recognition to settle into your awareness. God is the only presence, not the strongest presence, not a competing presence. Let this inner whisper arise of its own accord. The kingdom is within me, not as a belief, but as a fact of spiritual being. And as this recognition deepens, even slightly, the outer world begins to loosen its claim on your attention. You begin to sense the subtle atmosphere of the kingdom, a stillness that was here long before this moment, a peace that does not arise from the world and cannot be taken from you. Now, allow this deeper recognition to settle into your awareness. God is the only presence, not the strongest presence, not a competing presence. Let this inner whisper arise of its own accord. The kingdom is within me, not as a belief, but as a fact of spiritual being. I am in God. God is in me. We are one. Not two beings united, but one life expressing itself as individual being. Rest in this oneness. Do not attempt to understand it. Understanding belongs to the mind. This recognition belongs to spirit. Let this final realization unfold gently within you. The kingdom I sought is the presence that lives me. The peace I longed for is the truth of my own being. The God I prayed to is the life that I am. Rest in this truth. Let it hold you. Let it reveal itself to you in its own way, in its own time, in its own stillness. And when you return from this moment, you carry nothing outward, but something inward has quietly shifted, and this shift will reveal itself in ways you do not need to anticipate. For the kingdom has not come to you. You have awakened to the kingdom that was always here. As we bring this hour together to its quiet close, let us not think of what has been said as a lesson to be remembered, nor as a philosophy to be carried by the mind. What we have touched in these moments is not teaching, it is realization. It is the gentle unveiling of a truth that has been present within you since before time began. And the greatest gift you can give yourself is simply to continue returning to this inner awareness, not through effort, but through remembrance. For the kingdom of God is not an experience reserved for meditation alone. It is the ground upon which your true life stands. It is the air of spirit that surrounds you. It is the quiet presence that walks with you into every circumstance, every relationship, every choice, every breath. You do not leave the kingdom when you rise from silence, nor do you enter the world as though it were separate from God. The world of appearance may shift and change, but the kingdom remains the invisible reality behind every moment of your journey. Remember this. You are not a traveler seeking God. You are the place where God reveals himself. You are not a soul wandering toward the kingdom. You are the consciousness through which the kingdom comes into view. Do not struggle to hold this awareness. Do not make a task of living spiritually. Simply learn to pause many times throughout the day and gently turn inward, not to find God, but to recognize that God has never departed in that pause, even if it is only the length of a single breath, you may notice the subtle atmosphere of peace that signals the presence, and that peace becomes your guidance. That peace becomes your protection. That peace becomes your supply. That peace becomes your wisdom. The world of appearance may shift and change, but the kingdom remains the invisible reality behind every moment of your journey. Not because you have earned it or summoned it, but because it is the very foundation of your being. Let this awareness accompany you. Let it move with you into the ordinary routines of life. Let it enter your conversations, your work, your rest, your moments of solitude, your moments of connection. Let the kingdom be the silent influence behind every step you take. And as you do, you will find that you are living in a world where nothing stands outside God, nothing opposes God, nothing diminishes God, and therefore nothing can diminish you, because your life is the life of God expressed. My friends, the search is over. Not because you have reached the end, but because you have awakened to the beginning, to the presence that has been your life all along. And from this awareness, everything changes, not by your effort, but by the natural unfolding of divine harmony through your consciousness. Rest in this truth. Let it guide you. Let it illuminate the path before you, and know with quiet certainty that the kingdom of God is not merely near, it is your very self realized.